Thank you very much. And let me add my thanks to all of you here in the U.S. Center and online for joining this conversation. My charge today is very simple, is to give a little bit of a framing for the topics we hope to explore with you during this conversation. And by way of doing that, to introduce our three really fabulous international speakers. But we're very fortunate to have, in addition, Christy Goldfuss, the Managing Director of the White House Committee on Environmental Quality, Council on Environmental Quality, sorry. We always just say it by the acronym CEQ, so we begin to forget what it means. Managing Director of the United States Council on Environmental Quality, who is with us here today. And so I've asked Christy if she would please give us first some opening and framing remarks to set the tone and set the stage for the conversation that we'll have here together. So Christy?
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to our distinguished panel. I just want to say a few things about what is really a very innovative area for the United States and for the federal government right now in terms of dealing with coastal resilience. We have recently put out two pretty significant policy initiatives coming out of the Council of Environmental Quality that really take this opportunity to combine the actions across the federal government. So one of them focuses on ecosystem services. I mean, we all know really the value of our natural resources has an economic value that we can measure, but it also has somewhat of an intrinsic value. So we put out guidance to the agencies to start using the ecosystem services value. So that's the clean water, clean air, and recreational value of our natural resources, which allows us, when we're making determinations about how to build and how to invest in something, to quantify the natural value and look at how this can support a community. So the ecosystem services guidance was a huge step forward for us in our resilience agenda and really making sure that we value clean air, clean water, and recreation appropriately, and we put that in as part of the equation. Also, more recently, we've put out a presidential memorandum, we call it, to coordinate the efforts across agencies and departments around conservation finance. So something very exciting has happened in the United States over the past 10 years, where we've seen the private sector get incredibly engaged in restoration of wetlands. So what happened is we had a policy that came out in 2008 that provided a framework so the private sector could come in, buy up a piece of private land that was degraded and in some way not of a high natural level. They restore it to a very high natural level. And then when you have development taking place in an area where there's no other way to go, you have to develop and you have to degrade a wetland, that industry can buy a credit from the company that restored the wetland to a very high level and offset their impact in the watershed. And this has been a creative way to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. We would like to see this effort grow. If you look at the needs of restoring our natural resources and really firming up our coastal resilience, we can't do it alone. The federal dollars can't do it alone. So certainly looking for ways and vehicles and products that allow the private sector to come in. And it's not a philanthropic effort for them. When it comes to conservation finance, this is real investment that returns real dollars to the private sector. We're looking at it as, I believe the term in the United States is impact investment. So we're really excited about these initiatives that are just getting underway for us. They will be integral to making sure that our coastal communities are safe as we see the impacts of climate change happening every single day. And whether you're looking at Alaska Natives who are experiencing the loss of their communities, or what we saw with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, or Hurricane Sandy up in the New York area, coastal communities are really at the forefront of the impacts of climate change and extreme weather. So there are many solutions, much more to be learned across the world about how we're going to protect ourselves in these areas, and we're just getting started in the policy discussion about what those vehicles and tools look like. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, learning from what you all are seeing across the globe and what the opportunities are to kind of take what we've just begun in the federal government in the United States and take it to the next level. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Christy, very much. I think that's a great way to frame what we're going to talk about here today. So let me also do the introductions by way of some context, because we've got really a remarkable trio of people here to speak with us today. Maria Damanaki is the Global Managing Director for Oceans from the Nature Conservancy. It would take me a week to tell you all about her background. It's extensive and outstanding global service in this area. David Bresch is the Global Head of Sustainability for Swiss Re Insurance out of Switzerland. Lengthy work in global sustainability, risk research, atmospheric perils group, and a tremendous amount of work with various UN bodies associated with climate change and resilience over many years. And finally, Ambassador and Special Envoy from Grenada, Dr. Spencer Thomas. Dr. Thomas was appointed by his government into this ministerial post in 2008, but he comes to that with substantial private experience as the Director of Finance for Grenada, the Vice President on the Convention for Biodiversity. He is one of the leading experts on climate change and will give us, I know, a tremendous perspective here. So let me put this in just a little bit of context. Data from the United Nations tell us that in 2010, 1/2 of the world's population lived within 60 kilometers of the sea. And as our global population swells from its current 7 billion to 8.5 billion in just 15 years, we have to expect a tremendous increase of concentration in our coastal zones. In fact, one recent research paper estimated that the global population in low elevation coastal zones could go up by more than 40% in that 15-year time frame. In the United States alone, more than 1.2 million people are moving to our coastlines every year, collectively adding the equivalent of nearly one San Diego or Kathmandu or Stockholm or Port-au-Prince to the United States coastal zone every single year. And all of those people now are looking at the rising hazards of living in coastal zones under a changing climate. Multiple high-impact events have brought to life the growing vulnerability of our coastal communities and our infrastructure to high-impact weather and water events. In November 2013, as we all know, the Philippines experienced the strongest cyclone to hit land in recorded history. Typhoon Haiyan's 200-mile-an-hour winds and 2-story high storm surge slammed into homes, schools, and hospitals and took the lives of 6,300 Filipinos while displacing more than 4 million others. In the United States, 1 year prior, Hurricane Sandy dramatically threatened public safety through its disruption of crucial lifelines, including water, energy, and evacuation routes. But increasingly, our increasing vulnerability is not limited just to our concentrated and constructed communities. When we alter coastal environments through changes in land use, when we change the way water moves or what grows in the soil, or what type and how many animals live on the land, we place heavy demands on unique natural systems. And each of these alterations has a consequence. Some are immediate, loss of fish stocks or contamination of drinking water, but others unfold over longer timescales. Changes in temperature, sea and water levels, ocean acidity, and circulation. And I have little doubt that our first speaker on the panel, Maria Damanaki, will provide further context on the increasing vulnerability of our natural coastal ecosystems. As our impact on coastal ecosystems and on the ocean itself intensifies, so too does our vulnerability to natural hazards. Because when we disregard the health of our natural coastal ecosystems, we reduce the overall resilience of our coastal communities. At the simplest level, this is the fundamental reality that is driving the United States' focus on coastal resilience and the focus on investing in natural resources to be active components of the total resilience of our coastal zones. We're very pleased to see growing global awareness of the potential of natural solutions to curb the vulnerability of both our coastal human communities and the natural ecosystems on which they depend. We know that wetlands and coral reefs, oyster reefs, seagrasses, and mangroves form natural buffers. We know that they reduce the energy and the potential impacts of extreme events such as floods, hurricanes, and storm surge. But we also know that these natural buffers bolster the health and therefore enhance the resilience of the natural coastal ecosystems over time. And so although the consequences we face are global in scale, natural solutions offer an opportunity to address the challenge at local level through an investment in natural resources that pay multiple dividends. In fact, the integration of natural solutions in one of our marine protected areas outside of San Francisco has proven critical to supporting coastal communities and ecosystems. In that region, the eelgrass that we've restored supports both blue carbon, habitat health, and coastal properties in a defense against storm surge. The redesign of coastal roads also can both limit the risks associated with flooded roadways while also supporting the ecological adaptability of this ecosystem. These efforts were recently recognized by the Framework Convention as a best practice for ecosystem-based adaptation, an indication of the critical role that government ought to play at the local level of promoting community resilience through ecosystem conservation. I look forward to hearing about a project of similar multiple benefit to both ecosystems and human communities in Greenville Bay, Grenada, from Ambassador Thomas in his remarks. For many years, investments in these types of natural solutions were reserved to those initiatives pursued by governments and non-governmental organizations. Yet, deeper integration of environmental information and prediction into decision-making requires buy-in also from the private sector. In the United States, private companies have begun increasingly to recognize that the health of our ecosystems is linked integrally to the wealth of our businesses and our communities, from businesses based on our West Coast who are concerned about drought, to Gulf Coast firms fearing the loss of assets from rising sea levels. And through innovative finance development merged with ecosystem services, private companies are exploring conservation initiatives to protect ecosystems and therefore the sustainability of their businesses from the challenges posed by our evolving planet. This is what Christy mentioned in her remarks with respect to the impact investing, and I'm also eager to learn more about this point from David Bresch from Swiss Re, who will give us an insight about how the global insurance and reinsurance markets are responding to this. So the kind of discussion we're having here today, we believe, is critical to advancing our capacity to work better with Mother Nature in developing the resilience of our communities and being ready for the increasingly severe challenges she's likely to send our way. It's smart, it's cost-effective, and it's also critically linked to the natural viability of this dynamic planet that we live on. So I look forward to hearing from our other panelists today, and we're just going to go one by each down the row here with each making some remarks, and then we'll come back around to some question and answer together, including, we hope, questions from you here in the center and many of you online. So without further ado, Maria Damanaki.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Kathy, for your kind words, and I'm really very honored to be here in this panel to discuss about such an important subject. So, Kathy has raised a lot of very, very important issues. I would like just to mention two numbers, just to give you an idea about how big is the problem we are trying to tackle here. So in 2012, 5 years ago, 32 million people were displaced from their cities and villages and their homes just because of natural disasters. 32 million people in 2012. In the recent 15 years, we have spent $2.5 trillion around the globe for coastal protection. So this money is huge. But let's ask a question. Where did this money go? Where did it go? So we have spent mostly in building walls, in building dams, in putting cement in front of the sea. This is the way, the usual way to tackle things. We have spent 400 times more in gray infrastructure than in coastal protection. 400 times more money. So our idea, the idea that the Nature Conservancy would like to bring to this discussion is rather simple. What we want, what is our target? So our target is, until 2020, to redirect 10% of the investment that is going to be spent to go to investment in natural capital. Natural capital is what already Kathy mentioned. We are talking about the natural barriers, the coral reefs, the oyster reefs, the mangroves, the salt marshes, the seagrass, all the coastal infrastructure, the natural infrastructure that Mother or Father Nature has given already to us. This is the case. And this can be really a very, very good solution for a lot of reasons. First, because these natural systems, they have the ability to absorb a lot of the power of a natural catastrophe. Just to give you an example, we have studies, very, very good ones, that prove that, for example, the coral reefs can absorb up to 93% of the power of the storm. The mangroves can reduce the power of a sturge down to 63%. So these are tools that can work. These are barriers that can work. If we invest in them, instead of spending more and more on cement and walls, then we're going to have a triple win-win-win situation. First, there will be a win for people. For the people, for us, for local communities, for the humankind in general. Because these barriers are also the places where fish is going to reproduce, where the ecosystems can be reproduced, where we can have a healthy ocean. Also, these are the areas when we can have tourism and leisures, the ecosystems that are already mentioned and can give us a good source of income. So, there will be something very good for us. And also, we're going to protect our coastal areas. Then it will be a win situation for nature, because biodiversity will be there. These reefs are very important for the whole health of the ocean. And ocean is a climate regulator. I'm very sorry to see that in these discussions here, not here, in the next room, the formal negotiations, oceans are not present as they should, in my view. They are not present because we have not yet understood the importance of ocean. Every second breath we take is coming from the ocean. Every second breath we take is coming from the ocean. And oceans has absorbed almost 93% of the heat which was there from the industrial era until now. So ocean is very, very important as an ecosystem. And if we invest in natural infrastructure, then a healthy ocean can pay us back. And then there is also a win situation for the climate change, because these systems can absorb a lot of CO2, much more than the lands. Let's take the mangrove trees, for example. The mangrove trees can absorb 3 to 10 times more than the trees we have in the forests. So mangroves are very, very important. Mangrove forests, for the moment, the blue forests, as we call them, is 1 to 2% of the whole forest area in the world. But they absorb up to 19% of the CO2, which is there in the atmosphere. So to make a long story short, and I'm stopping here, if we invest in natural infrastructure, if we are going for adaptation and restoration projects for our corals, mangroves, oyster reefs, reefs in general, salt marshes, then we are going to have win for the environment, win for the climate change, and win for the people. So this is our proposal. We need your help to go for our target to redirect 10% of the investment, which is going to be spent one way or another to the natural infrastructure. In order to do that, we are using the help of World Bank to go to the local communities and account the benefits for them. And we are using our cooperation with Swiss Re and other partners from insurance companies and reinsurance industry that have the capability, as our next panelist, the capability to model all this and give a good solution. So I'm turning to our next panelist to inform us about that.
Thank you for your attention and warm welcome also from my side. A real pleasure to be here. As just been explained by the previous speaker, the case has been made, and the case cannot be actionated by a single entity or a single actor. What we do as a reinsurance company or insurance in general, we put a price tag on risk. So we basically look at the world through a risk lens and says, to some extent, we say what can go wrong and what consequences that might bear. And then we also can use that price tag to bring light to what could you do to basically reduce risk. And that's then an incentive piece to our story. So it's not only to scare people, that's not by no means the goal. The goal is to share risk. So what we ultimately do, we share risk across different sectors, different communities, as that way they get easier to be refinanced. And that's the value proposition of insurance. Now what we do see, that this model works in today's world, most places, at the current level of natural catastrophes. And that's why we have a keen interest to keep the variability of the natural system we all depend so much on in a manageable level. And that's why we strongly advocate 2 degrees at least as a kind of warming target. Well, target is a sad point to say that. But as we do know, most of the solutions we provide do not work in a 4-degree world, just to state it very clearly. So by no means do we think adaptation can save us. But we unfortunately moved the system already so far that we do utterly need adaptation. What does that really mean? And that's why we felt, also in looking at the case that has been made, that should be a compelling case. Why isn't it yet happening? So we looked a lot at the economics of adaptation, saying, what are the economic drivers for decision makers to allocate and reallocate money into measures which truly reduce risk, also longer term? So we looked at risk today, we looked at economic development, and then we look at the aggravating effect that climate change does bring to that equation. We did that in more than 20 places around the world. So what I'm going to tell you is not a one-off single case study where everything could be completely different elsewhere. And we looked at different sectors, different habitats, different regions, obviously, and also different cultures to deal with risk. We always engaged in deep dialogue with local communities, what they're currently doing to manage risk, what they might have in mind to manage risk. Then we engaged with the science community, and especially also, obviously, with colleagues like NOAA to better understand what might change in the climatic sense, and then we put it all back in our models to really place to the situation today, the situation as it might look like if we developed the way we thought we might best develop, and then we stress tested the system by putting some climate change scenario in it. And then we re-engaged with the community and said, hey, that's what it might look like. Do you have any idea how to cope with that? And then we took all these coping actions, you could call them adaptation measures, back in these models. So we said, you can build a seawall, we heard it. It does reduce your risk to some extent. But you could also invest in reviving your reefs. You could also invest in maintaining your mangroves. And what's interesting is then if you look at discounted cash flows of costs and benefits, a seawall, many places hardly makes the cut. So you pour a lot of concrete, and some places it does make sense, honestly, but in other places it's a lot of concrete. But then if you look at places where you can revive reefs, it's often for $1 you invest in reef revival or $1 you invest in mangroves and maintenance of those, it's up to $10 in risk reduction. So it's an extremely compelling case to decision makers. And the reason why it hasn't come so much out of these conversations is that it's a risk lens. This money you don't have in your pocket if you invest in that. It's money you save by not losing it later. And that's a bit a harder case to make. And that's why we felt it's good to engage with a community which knows these things better than we do. So we're good in doing the math on the risk side, but we definitely do depend on both the local communities to engage in a dialogue to figure what should be done and how could it be best done. And on the other hand, with science and institutions that do understand complex systems. By combining those, we do think we first put a price tag on these risks and we tell people and help them to better manage the environment and obviously therefore to protect their livelihoods. Again, in the last comment and then handing over to the next speaker, in the Caribbean, we're in an extremely fortunate situation with the Caribbean Risk Facility. We basically have been investing in that to bring it all along together with partners like the World Bank and obviously the CARICOM countries. And also then we supported these countries with exactly these economics of adaptation studies to understand what can you do on the ground to reduce risk. Because the parametric cover that CRIF provides does only pay for the big scenarios and the big events that happen, but for the smaller things that happen every now and then, it's very wise to really act on a local ground. And that's what I would like to bring across too. We can basically absorb the large shocks, but for the things that have to happen on the ground, nature-based solutions are much more powerful, and we have to find a balance between the two of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here to speak on Grenada perspective and maybe even a small island's perspective on the issue of coastal resilience. In the 5 minutes I saw that I'm allocated, I will speak specifically on the context and some approaches and the impact as we go forward on that project and coastal resilience. But I want to take my departure from the last speaker in terms of the CRIF, because we need to put this whole issue into perspective. For us in the Caribbean, in Grenada, we are a coastal community. That is number one. About 70% of the people actually live in the coast. And the infrastructure, every important infrastructure is on the coast. So we are a coastal people. This is number one. The issue of vulnerability and the special circumstances of those countries are very clear in this negotiation. That's the reason why we speak about 1.5 rather than 2, because we really believe that we need to be very ambitious because of the particular characteristics and special circumstances of countries like Grenada. For instance, Grenada, we had a hurricane in Grenada. In the space of 1 hour, we lost 200% of the gross domestic product. 200%, not 2%, 200%. I will challenge anyone in this room to give me that kind of comparative figure for any other place or any other kind of ecosystem in the world. This is what we're talking about here. We had this, and even before we could have recovered from this, 11 months later, another Category 3 hurricane brought untold damages to the country. So that is the kind of circumstances that we have when we speak about no longer temperature increases beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's a particular vulnerable country. I must say, as a consequence, that 2 weeks ago, Grenada was in Paris, not at the Paris COP, but at the Paris Club. Why? Again, because of the question of the debt, as occasioned by the natural disasters which we faced. The debt to GDP ratio in Grenada is over 100%. So that is the context when we speak about special circumstances, special needs, and the vulnerability of islands like Grenada. So that is the context. In terms of the approach, I want to raise 3 points. The first point is that we have to take a very integrated and holistic approach to coastal zone management. The land management is as critical as what we do in the coast. Because if we don't fix the problems in the highland, if we don't fix the problems in the mountains, if we don't fix the problems on the riverbeds, if we don't fix the problems in the wetlands, we'll have more problems in the coastal zone. So we need to take a very holistic approach to coastal zone management and coastal zone resilience. So land management is critical. So in that case, policies, ecosystem-based adaptation is also a very key issue and is one of our fundamental approach to handle the issue of coastal zone resilience. Our reefs, our mangroves, our rivers, our forests, ecosystem-based restoration is critical, and that is the crux of the matters that we are dealing with now in terms of the At the Water's Edge project. Restoration of those critical ecosystems, because we believe that ecosystem health is critical to us to address the issue of climate change, another very important point. So the point here is ecosystem restoration is key for coastal zone resilience. The third point I would like to make here is that public awareness and public education is critical also for ecosystem-based adaptation and management, land management, and coastal zone. We have to be very, very persistent in education and public awareness. And the fourth issue has to do with community. And as you mentioned, the community is the key. For us, the buck stops at the community level. Because what we see is that social and economic advantages and benefits for the community is critical. I've listened to one of the youths in the youth forum, and they were saying that we in this communication, in this negotiation, speak about youth with tokenism. And I believe, I took that word very seriously, because I believe we cannot have tokenism in terms of community participation in ecosystem-based adaptation, in land management, and in coastal zone resilience activities. So the well-being of the community is critical. The communities must be actively involved in the decision-making in terms of reef restoration and all the activities in the sector. They must be part of it. They must be integrally involved in it and making those decisions. And as a consequence, you will have livelihood benefits and you will have biodiversity benefits. So the buck stops really at the community level. So I want to stop here just to also indicate that in Grenada, next year, we will be having a Blue Growth meeting. Ambassador is right here. He will speak clearly on this, maybe in the question and answers period. But this is an invitation to monitor this as a very significant development for this kind of work that we are doing here. And I would like to say thank you at this point. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers for providing some both very informative and in a number of ways challenging and provocative perspectives on this challenge. Can I see a show of hands, anyone in the audience that already right away has a question they want to put? Or do we need to get the wheels turning a little bit by discussing among ourselves? You're being too shy, but we'll start up here then. So, Mr. Ambassador, if I may start back with you. You talk about the importance of public awareness and education and about having the communities directly engaged in the planning processes all the way from summit to the sea. Can you tell us a little bit about what have you found to be effective mechanisms for first informing and getting the public up to speed, and what have you found to be the most effective mechanisms for really incorporating them into the decision process?
Thank you very much for this. I really believe, as I indicated, it takes maybe 6 minutes when we have a heavy rainfall for everything up there to be in the coastal zone. So we must involve our farmers and our fishermen into this process. And the community engagement we speak here now is really getting from the farmers and the fishermen how best they can be involved in the decision-making. So they have to be part of the decision-making. They have to be involved in it and engaged in the solutions and be part of the solutions. It must be tied to the income and their livelihoods. Whatever they do, whatever we do, must be tied to the income of the farmer and to the fisherman. And I think that is the critical aspect of our involvement. It must be that they are integrally involved in the decision-making and must see livelihood as part of the outcome of their involvement.
Thank you. In the United States, I know one of our challenges to achieving that goal that you just said is very often that there are so many different jurisdictions at different levels, each with a different boundary and each with a different remit. And so we commonly find in the U.S. that it's very helpful to have either non-governmental organizations and sometimes the private sector stepping in to establish and host the conversation. In a sense, they create a different frame for the conversation that pulls all the jurisdictions in to participate. I wonder if either David or Maria have some comment on cases or approaches that you have found effective to do that.
Just to kick you off, you're spot on. I mean, I should have said before, we provide a fact base. We don't take decisions. On adaptation, decisions need to be taken on a local scale by the local stakeholders. But it's important that you talk common language, and often the language of the stakeholders is what matters to them. And as you exactly said, it's their livelihood. So it's not the number of hurricanes, it's not the wind speed that matters, or the sea level height. What really matters is, do I make a living out of it? And probably even more so, is there a way to make a decent living out of it? And so to translate these kind of abstract numbers, like the physical parameters of the system, into what matters on a livelihood level, that I felt is often kind of an enabling factor in such a conversation. And then the other thing is to put it all in the same metric, so that it's not that you have to compare again the seawall against the mangroves in completely different manners and fashions. To basically really say, no, we can play that all through. It's often a model, but we can play it all through, and we can really compare apples with apples, so to say, at least in a model world. What's very important, and my physicist by training, we should never then think it will play out as we thought. So we should use all that just to rather educate our thinking, and the world will be different. And that's the nice thing about this planet too. It's a bit different than what we thought. Otherwise, it would look probably pretty dull. So in that sense, always with a sense of humbleness. It's not to say we know it exactly, but we probably can help that conversation.
I'm a geophysicist. Our motto is all models are wrong, but some models are useful.
Okay, let's follow this discussion about the models. So in the Nature Conservancy, we're trying to find a model that works. And this means that we have to answer to two questions, in my view. First, who puts the money? And second, who is going to take the benefit? Sometimes these are connected, and if we can connect them, then we have a very good model, if I can say that. So you can say that we're going, for example, in Grenada, and actually we were there in Granville, and now we are in Mexico, and we're trying to do the same. And we try to do some restoration work about an oyster reef, a mangrove forest, or whatever. We have money from our donors, but this donation money is never enough. These are costly exercises, and we need more money. So we have to answer the question, who is going to take the benefit? And the benefit, perhaps, can be taken, for example, by the users of the space afterwards. Let's say, for example, that there will be some touristic enterprises, tourism industry, owners of the hotels, persons like that. They can put some money in advance in order to have a better area, a beautiful area they can use for their clients. In some cases in Indonesia, we have even fees for the tourists who are there, and they can pay a short amount of money, like more symbolic, but it gives an additional income to all of that. So we are trying to create an alliance, to make a long story short, between the local authorities. I totally agree that local authorities have to be involved, because the local people have to be involved, with the fishermen, with the future users of that, and of course with companies like Swiss Re or other. For example, in Mexico, we are trying to involve the Banamex, the biggest bank which is there, World Bank, other people who can give something to this project. And this can help, as you have said already, Undersecretary, because it can absorb the difficulties about bureaucracy and whatever. So I can say to you that the pilot project in Grenada worked. The pilot project is there. Now we need money for scaling it up. And we are going now to Mexico to do something very, very good also, referring to the whole coast around the Mesoamerican Reef. So I think that this can work. Public money, industry money, and NGOs there, everybody can share the same vision.
Thank you. And Christy, this has been a theme in a number of the policies of the Obama administration as well, so maybe give some of the American examples.
Well, I think we're going to have a huge case study coming out of the Restore Council. So there was just a settlement between BP and the United States after the Deepwater Horizon spill that many of you may have heard of more than 5 years ago. The settlement is $22 billion that is going to be used in various forms of restoration. It will be competed in the project level, but I think we will get a good sense through that process of what type of projects work, what the outcomes are, how we're going to measure them. It's an enormous amount of money. I believe in the United States, definitely the largest environmental settlement we've ever had. So it'll be interesting to watch over the next 10, 20 years as that money is spent and put to use to see what works and take some of these models that we already know about and make sure that we have the metrics and measurement to put that money to good use.
I would, before recognizing two questions from the audience, I would just add moderator's prerogative. One other point on the Restore settlement, that arrangement was set up with the wisdom of realizing you will need metrics to monitor the effectiveness of the project. Yes, that's true. But there also needs to be underlying science and monitoring. There is still much we need to know about the processes, ecosystem processes in the coastal zone. So it is very important to continue to invest in the underpinning science and in the long-term monitoring. That has to be in addition to tracking project metrics. It cannot be instead of, and that fact has been built into the Restore program. I've seen two hands. Maybe we can put both questions on the board and take them in turn. Here and here, please.
Thank you. Angus Friday, Grenada's ambassador to the United States. We very much appreciate the work that TNC is doing in Grenada, of course, and we welcome the recent U.S. announcement on insurance of fisheries and so on. Very quickly, we've been talking about natural capital and ecosystem services for some time. TNC has just come out with an excellent financial product around that in terms of debt for nature. But it seems to me that we still have a long way to go, or we still have much more to do in terms of coming up with additional innovative financial products based on natural capital. And I think given all of the metrics that we've heard today, there seems to be a very good case for doing more of that. I was just wondering from TNC's point of view whether you have some sort of a think tank or something along those lines working with other partners to see how we can develop additional financial instruments in particular to deal with this. And let me just take this opportunity, very quick plug. Yes, we will be having a Blue Growth Investment Conference in Grenada to look at some of these innovative solutions. But the question is to TNC. Thank you.
Okay, and then we have a question in the, let me take
both?
Let's do all three then.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll go ahead.
Can we please keep quickly to the question?
Okay. My question is to Christy. Measurement of ecosystem services and translocation of ecosystem services are two very, very important components whenever credit is associated with ecosystem services. Unfortunately, we have talked in terms of RED and RED+, but we have never talked in terms of translocation of ecosystem services, which is one of the very, very important components for restoration of wetlands or for restoration of coastal lands.
Thank you, sir.
My question is to Mr. David and others. I was wondering if there is a possible way to demystify costs and benefits. In developing countries, there is a perception that much of the investment should be in the form of a public good by the state concerned, and then the benefits generally accrue to parties other than those who are immediately living in the coastal areas. There could be externalities, there could be hoteliers and others who want to cash in on the opportunities. This is sometimes seen as a threat rather than a benefit. And also the conflict between sea and land, if it is demystified, is what kind of a harmony can you bring while you are doing the eco-restoration, because there is no credible mapping of a particular coastal zone, which takes time and it takes a lot of science, and there should be a lot of work done towards the particular impacts a particular ecosystem has had. Thank you.
Who would like to start?
I would like to thank Ambassador Friday for his kind words. A short answer. We have a very good team. It's called Nature Vest, and we have a lot of capacity, I can say, expertise about finance. So I can mention some of the products we are developing for the moment. We have debt swaps, and we have announced today the first debt swap with the government of Seychelles. But also, I think that perhaps we can discuss that with your government, Grenada, but also with Marshall Islands, with Jamaica. We are thinking of them. Then we have these insurance products we are discussing now as the product we are trying to develop with Swiss Re. And then we have bonds, catastrophe bonds or blue bonds. We are working now in Philippines, for example, with World Bank to try to find a way through it. But it's rather premature to say that we are there. And also we have offsets. We have done that with extracting companies, for example, in Venezuela and elsewhere. But I think that there is plenty of room if we really want to go through this. As our President Mark Tersek said an hour ago, we are going to invest a lot in these impact capital products. Natural capital products, because we think that the future is there. The Nature Conservancy has invested $23 million in these Seychelles, that swap. So it is a lot, even for the Nature Conservancy. But I think this is the future.
And I would just add, because we're working with the Nature Conservancy and other outside organizations on a lot of this, in the United States, our policies aren't always right for the private sector to see a return on the investment. And we're just starting to get the information and the details that we need from the private sector in these large-scale models to figure out how we align the policies and give the indication that we need to give to the private sector so they can intervene and find a way to develop a product. So we have a model on private lands that works very well on private lands and wetlands where we can have a credit basically a credit swap, but on public lands where we have an enormous need and not enough federal dollars, the policies just don't align to make the private industry interested in making that investment. So we're doing what we can now to learn the lessons from private land, see if there's something we can do on public land, and we're working with TNC and other banks to see what the possibilities are. So I think we're just starting to scratch the surface here and have a long way to go in the policy space to make it possible for the money to really flow.
And the other two questions.
Yeah, just a few comments. You triggered an absolutely crucial point, is that when I mean cost benefit, I always see it as a starting point. Because it's a strange conversation if these numbers are not on the table, but these numbers do not and shall never preempt any decision. As we all know, that there's a lot of assumptions that go into these numbers. So as soon as they're on the table, there is a risk that this factual element becomes compelling. And people do not think about co-benefits, which are often need to be accounted, other values that do matter. And so that's what's important to keep in mind. Also, I often think that through this rigorous studying of the situation, we might be able to level the playing field, to basically say it's a set of information which is then available to everybody. I also should mention that the model we use here with TNC is an open source model. It's not Swiss Re's internal proprietary model. We have that for the pricing of the piece, but that's our commercial endeavor. But for studying the systems and the complexity of these systems, we do think we benefit from engaging with the community, because honestly, I teach with that model also, and students tell me what's not good enough. And I learn much faster than would I try to figure it myself. So bringing that out, it exposes you to criticism. And some people say you shouldn't discount at all, because there is a future, and it could even be the discount rate by today is now negative. And that's something you should think about. It could be that the next generation will face a world which is not one where they can live up to their dreams. And so there's an element we should take into account in that. And in that spirit I see these models. Never as factual or just putting facts on a table, but not as the end of a conversation. And I pretty much believe in iterative solutions. To say, even if we do not know everything, let's give it a try. And probably I've been long enough for that, spending a part of my life in the US, not a long stretch, but probably a decisive piece, to say it's much better you learn faster than to sit and wait. Now, you should not overstretch that, because you could do big mistakes. But if you listen and you get the feedbacks from the system you operate in, you better manage it for sure.
I think we have time for one more question from the floor, if there is one.
And we have gotten a lot of comments and quotes on the web. No questions yet, so this is your very last chance. Hashtag AskUSCenter. But I wanted to make sure we let the ambassador from Grenada know that we got a compliments to Grenada for all your great work. That came up on the web, so thank you.
Well done.
Is there one last question?
Anybody last on the floor? Yes, here we are.
Hello, I'd just like a couple more, kind of get more in depth in this idea of tourism and this restoration of coastal ecosystems. It seems like a great opportunity not only to get, because a lot of coastal areas are very heavily tourist dependent, but it's also seemed like a great opportunity for education in those type of situations as well. So I'm just curious what other type of opportunities that kind of go around that idea.
I'll kick one answer off there and pull something from an earlier panel. I think the prospect for coastal tourism and touristic benefits certainly true, and through those generating an appreciation of coastal zones and the ecological importance of coastal oceans, absolutely true. But I would just add, we should not forget that the local citizens live in that coastal zone every day. The tourists come for a week or two, in a season or two, but when we make these kinds of investments, when we restore natural environments, when we create a nice dune land or a layered wetland or terrace to be part of the buffer that protects the coast, we're also providing a place where every day, the people who live there every day can get out into nature, can get some exercise, can appreciate their own environment. And as I'm sure our colleague from Grenada will remind us, but we certainly know it in the United States too, if the local people who live on that coastal zone don't themselves engage with and richly value that coastal zone, then all of what we're talking about is something between much harder and quite impossible. Mr. Ambassador, closing word to you, sir.
Well, my closing word is we heard that adaptation can't save us. I think I heard that, and I believe that, and we all believe that. That's why we are arguing for the issue of loss and damage, because adaptation can't save us. But we must invest in adaptation, and we are doing so. And we thank very much the US government, the German government, TNC, and all the donors for helping us move to invest deeply in adaptation. So I would like to say also that we also believe that for us in the Caribbean, the definition of coastal zone is something that we need to look at, because the whole of the country for us is a coastal zone. So we need to also be very mindful of that. And finally, we're speaking about private sector involvement in adaptation and so on. We also have to remember, as I indicated earlier on, that there is no borrowing capacity in many of our countries because of our high GDP, debt to GDP ratios. So we have to look at the kind of innovative financing have to be at a very concessionary level. And in this regard, that's why we say thank you very much to the US, to Germany, and to the TNC.
Thank you. Let me ask you please to join me in thanking our panel for their great expertise and their contributions to this discussion.